Greetings and welcome to Act One, a Canadian take on news events. I'm your host, Gordy Canuck, and we're going to be talking about tonight Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, at least for now, and asking the question of will he survive the leadership review? There are a lot of different roads that can open up depending on those results. It can be very cut and dried, or it can be very murky. So we're going to dive right in. What's happening is there's going to be a leadership, or not a leadership, rather a convention. The Conservative Party of Canada is holding its convention, a policy convention, but it's going to include the leadership review, and it's taking place at the end of this month. It's taking place January 29th, 30, 31st. And they'll be discussing all manner of things. What is the Conservative Party of Canada's policy on Trump taking over Greenland? What is Conservative policy on taxation? All number of things. There'll be youth delegates. And on the 30th, that's the Friday. The convention is running Thursday, Friday, Saturday, last 3 days of the month. On the 30th, the Friday at 7:30 p.m., the polls will open and delegates will be casting ballots as to whether they want Pierre Poilievre to remain as leader of the Conservative Party or not. It's a binary choice. It's like gender. You got two choices. Do you want Pierre Poilievre to lead the Conservative Party into the next election or not? And how is the vote going to break down? I have some thoughts in the matter, but we're going to have to wait for the results. I've got Sharunian Allegiance is here saying saying that I definitely want to travel to Poland. I don't know where that remark came from. I have no particular desire to see Gdansk or Warsaw, but I wouldn't turn down a free trip. And then Nancy, who's one of the moderators on the stream, just to keep things within the guardrails, because political discussion can sometimes attract trolls and other regrettable individuals who want to dominate things and profanity and what have you. So, and there's another moderator, Danny. We'll see if he shows up. I was late in notifying Nancy and Danny that I was doing a live stream tonight. This was kind of a spur of the moment thing, but I think this is a topic that resonates, and it's something that I'm reasonably passionate about. I've been a political junkie my entire life, pretty much, certainly from my teenage years onward. I did study political science at York University. I don't contend to have all the answers, to be an expert or anything like that. If I know something, I will state it confidently. There are things that I'm less sure of. Anyway, let's get in. What does the vote mean? If Pierre Poilievre gets less than 50% of that vote, if more than 50% plus one of delegates casting a ballot at the leadership convention, if they vote to not have Pierre Poilievre lead them into the next election, then it is cut and dried. Pierre Poilievre's career as leader of the Conservative Party stops. He will know at that point, it's likely that Pierre Poilievre would step down. He might walk away from politics altogether. Those aspects are a little unknown. What does Pierre Poilievre decide to do if the party opts that they don't want him leading the party anymore? Then Pierre Poilievre can stay on as a MP representing Battle River Crowfoot, I believe is the name of the riding that he represents currently. Conversely, he could step away from politics altogether. He could resign his seat, resulting in a by-election. I don't think that is a likely outcome. I don't believe that 50% plus one or more of Conservative Party delegates will vote for Pierre Poilievre to leave. It's a question of how high above 50% will he get? And this is where things get murky. If Pierre Poilievre gets, I would say, 70% or more, I believe that that will be taken as a firm mandate. 70% of the party, 70% of the delegates representing the 343 electoral district associations across Canada, that they have ratified Pierre Poilievre's leadership and they want him to continue. And then I think it's cut and dried. He stays on as leader. He's leading the Conservative Party into the next election. Where we get really murky, really cloudy, really questionable is when a leadership review results in 60%, 66%, and then we're into murky territory. By the rules of the Conservative Party of Canada, if he gets 51% plus one, he can maintain, he's been confirmed. They want him as the leader, 50% plus one, but leading a party where half or even a third of delegates want you gone is not a strong endorsement. And often what will happen in that case is, regardless of the fact that they got more than 50%, it's still not a strong enough mandate, and the leader may at that time, regardless of, whether it's Liberal, Conservative, whether it's Poilievre or Joe Clark or Mulroney or whoever, at that point, often what will happen is they will call for a leadership race. They will maybe stay on as leader, maybe have an interim leader appointed. And then the question is, do they run again for the leadership or do they withdraw? The last example I can think of this was back after the election, and I think the year was 1984, when Joe Clark, leader of what was then the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada, lost the election to Pierre Elliott Trudeau and the Liberal Party. This is back in 1984. And so, having lost the election, he was subject to an automatic leadership review. And he came in and around that murky 67% area. And what Joe Clark decided to do, that with roughly one third of the party not supporting his leadership, he opted to call for a leadership race, and he ran. He ran to retake the position that he had, to solidify his hold as leader of the party. And what happened in the subsequent leadership race is that Brian Mulroney, who had been the president of the Conservative Party of Canada, not an elected official, but the president of the party itself, he threw his hat in the ring and he won the leadership from Joe Clark. There are all kinds of things that can happen in the back rooms. I will invite you at this point, now that I've been going on for 8-9 minutes, that the live chat is open. And I see that there are a number of people out there. What do you think will happen? Do you think Pierre Poilievre is going to be, give me a number. Do you think he'll get less than 50%? Do you think he'll get more? Will he get more than 60, more than 70? Let me know your thoughts. I'm confident he'll get more than 50%, but I'm not confident he'll punch as high as 70%. For me, if he gets to 70% plus, we're good, we're settled. Pierre Poilievre, his leadership has been affirmed. He will be leading the Conservative Party into the next election. If he gets less than 70%, now we're into cloudy territory. If he only gets around 60, I think it's a slam dunk that a leadership race would be called. And then the question becomes, does Pierre Poilievre throw his name in to try and, like Joe Clark did, or does he withdraw? all kinds of things can happen. And this will all be coming down on Friday. Well, the voting starts on Friday, the 30th of January, 2 weeks from now, basically. And the voting opens at 7:30 p.m. Calgary, Alberta time, 9:30 for those of us in the Eastern time zone, even later if you're in the Maritimes or Newfoundland. And the thing is, their itinerary, they have their convention schedule, which I've looked at, and they don't have listed when the votes will be counted or when the vote totals will be announced. So I don't know if it's, I don't know when the voting ends, and I don't know when the results will be announced. And this is not a process governed by Elections Canada or Alberta elections. It is governed strictly, it's done in-house by the Conservative Party of Canada itself. And I'm see that I have a good number of people watching the stream right now. It's fluctuating, 9, 10, up to a dozen, 13, 14. But no one's commenting in the live chat. And I enjoy the live chat because it gives me stuff to springboard off of. And I typically find that when I do political content, the channel is called Act One, a Canadian take on news events. And quite often, news events, they almost always have a political angle to them. But now we're both feed into Conservative Party politics. And I was expecting more passion, more commentary. My own bias, my own preference is I want Pierre Poilievre to lead the Conservative Party of Canada into the next election. I am not a card-carrying member of the Conservative Party. Ergo, I am certainly not a delegate. I will not be in Calgary. I will not be partaking in this process. I'm what I would call an interested observer who wants to see Pierre Poilievre affirmed as the leader of the party. I am hoping that he gets 80, 90%. The higher, the better, because the higher the percentage, the better a demonstration it is to the Canadian electorate as a whole, the voting public, that the Conservative Party is united behind their leader. It's got to be remembered that Pierre Poilievre delivered the best results in terms of popular vote that the Conservative Party of Canada has ever seen. The Conservative Party of Canada, as it's currently constructed, came into being in 2003 after a merger with the old Progressive Conservative Party and what was called the Canadian Alliance Party. Prior to the emergence of a party called the Reform Party, which later changed their name to the Canadian Alliance, the conservative political landscape there was only one party, starting with Sir John A. Macdonald and going on for a long time after. It was the Conservative Party of Canada. Then, and I don't know exactly when this happened, whether it was in the 1960s or 1970s, but the Conservative Party of Canada opted to change its name, and they changed the name from Conservative Party of Canada to the Progressive Conservative Party of Canada. A bit of an oxymoron. We're progressive and conservative. Well, which one are you? But at that time, conservatism as a mindset, just as an adjective to describe people, conservatism was not popular. Everyone wanted to be progressive. And we still see remnants of that today. We're progressing right over a cliff, but people like the word progressive. So they went with this name, progressive conservative. And then and I'm trying to remember exactly when it was, but during the time when Jean Chrétien was Prime Minister of Canada, a new party emerged, and it was called the Reform Party of Canada. It was largely a Western-based party. Their biggest slogan was "The West wants in." there was this impression, and I think a valid impression, that Canadian politics was dominated by what conservative voices referred to as the Laurentian elites. This idea of people in their cottages north of Montreal, up in the Laurentian mountains, would sit behind their closed doors, sipping their Merlot and their Chardonnay and their Pinot Noir, and they would make decisions that impacted all of Canada, and they would largely ignore the concerns of Western Canadians. So the Reform Party came out with Preston Manning as its leader, and their big slogan was "The West wants in." And in the elections that they ran, the Reform Party pretty much swept Western Canada, certainly all of Alberta, Saskatchewan, large parts of Manitoba. They elected members in BC, but they never were able to elect a single member east of the Ontario-Manitoba border. It was kind of like a firewall. They couldn't get through it. And part of the reason they couldn't get through it is the old Progressive Conservative Party was still around, still running candidates. And so as a result, what happened was voters in Ontario were splitting. Conservative-minded voters, some were voting Progressive Conservative, some were voting Reform. The Liberals were splitting up the middle in every tightly contested riding. And Jean Chrétien won 3 consecutive majority governments. And starting in and around, I think, 1991, 1992. I don't want to sit there and go through the exact dates. I'm going off the top of my head here. I like doing my live streams live and unscripted. And at any rate, Nancy has written, I saw 80% and up. There will be polls out. There will be straw man, or not straw man, but rather straw type polling going on by media outlets. And they'll be talking to the delegates, and they'll be saying that of the people I've spoken to, of the delegates here, and there will probably be in and around 1,000 delegates would be my guess. There'll probably be 2,000 to 3,000 people at this convention in Calgary. And, they will start voting Friday evening, 7:30 p.m. And we'll find out at that point. But I was going through a bit of Canadian political history. And so in 2003, conservative-minded individuals, both with the Reform Party, changed leaders. They got rid of Preston Manning, stepped down. They elected a new leader, Stockwell Day. The name of the party was changed from the Reform Party of Canada to the Canadian Alliance Party, CAP, and they still couldn't break through. They were the official opposition, but they couldn't form government because of vote splitting, primarily in Eastern Canada. So finally, the Progressive Conservative, party, which had been led by Joe Clark, after Mulroney left, Tim Campbell took over. The party was decimated, and Joe Clark came back as leader and helped resurrect their fortunes, but only in Eastern Canada. They were electing some members in Ontario, down east. And so Joe Clark eventually resigned, and Peter MacKay took over. And after Peter MacKay took over, they entered into negotiations with the Canadian Alliance Reform Party, and they merged. And after merging, they became known as, again, the Conservative Party of Canada, the CPC, and that happened in 2003. It was a new political entity, a merger between the old Progressive Conservatives and the Canadian Alliance, formerly known as the Reform Party. And between 2003 and this most recently completed election, coming up on a year ago, in April of 2025, the Conservatives have never polled higher than they did under Pierre Poilievre. They were up in and around 42%. Stephen Harper never achieved 42% of the popular vote. Stephen Harper's political success was the result of liberal-minded voters, progressive-minded voters splitting between the NDP and the Liberal parties, and to a degree, the Greens. And with with that vote split, it's because of that Stephen Harper was able to win 3 elections, 2 as a minority and 1 majority. I have A. St. Clair here, saying that he will win the Conservative leadership. So St. Clair is of the opinion that Poilievre will I'm assuming you're saying he will maintain his leadership hold. He will get the required number of votes to avoid having a leadership race. But St. Clair is of the opinion that in no way can he win a federal election. St. Clair is saying that Poilievre needs to be bolder and get on those American podcasts and TV. Canadian media will always bring him down. I know that certainly the CBCs and the government subsidized mainstream media outlets do not want a Pierre Poilievre leading the Conservative Party of Canada. They would prefer someone like former leader Aaron O'Toole, someone who is willing to put so much water into the wine, the Conservative wine, that you don't even recognize that it's got any wine in it at all. So thank you for the comment, St. Clair. I wish I could highlight it and share it, but I can't. I don't have that functionality. When you're watching this podcast, channel, station, whatever you want to call it, Act One, A Canadian Take, my station is about as bare bones basic as you're ever going to find. A laptop, built-in mic and camera, no production values. And I hope my aim in doing that, I hope it speaks to a degree of authenticity that people will recognize that I don't have any strings in behind my back pulling me in one way or another. I'm not told what content to create. I'm not told what opinions to have or what opinions to push. I am a free speech advocate. I think the biggest issue in Canada is that left and right don't talk with each other often enough. I have no compunction whatsoever in professing myself to have what I consider to be a moderate conservative outlook. But for some, unless you're willing to acknowledge an endless number of genders, that they'll paint you as an extremist. Well, he's transphobic. He doesn't recognize that there are an endless number of genders, and it's like, give me a break. Just because I'm not willing to join you out there on the fringe and totally ignore the basic fabric of reality does not make me transphobic. I love the weaponization of the language that the extremist end of the liberal side uses. They always love this word phobia, transphobia, Islamophobia. Everything's a phobia. Phobia is a clinical term and it means an irrational, you're incapacitated by fear. I don't know anyone who's incapacitated by fear when they come across a man who professes himself to be a woman. I've worked with individuals of this mentality, of this mindset, and I talk to them. I don't have a phobia. Likewise, I have serious issues with the Islamic faith, with things like Sharia law, but does that mean I'm phobic? That I have a phobia, that I can't, getting near I become irrational, I become decapacitated if I'm confronted with a member of the Muslim faith? Hardly. Yeah. I know 2 gentlemen in our town, both named Mohammed. One runs a gas station, one runs a discount store. I patronize them all the time, engage them in conversation. Like, please. Anyway, fill up the live chat. The biggest issue that Poilievre has is he not only is he fighting the Liberal Party, he's also fighting the media. He's also going up against the CBC, CTV, Global News, and a large segment of the online media sphere. Print journalism, Toronto Star, National Post, Globe and Mail, they hardly have any sway with the electorate anymore. And we're all being pushed into echo chambers. And so we only hear our own points of view coming back at us. And some of that is, we, there are individuals who engage in that consciously. I come across all kinds of people after the election just finished. This election, or April 24th, 28th, I forget, April 2025, when Carney won the election, I came across so many people who said it had to be fraudulent. Everyone I talked to can't stand Carney in the Liberal Party. There's no way Canadians voted. Well, did you talk to any people who? No, if I meet someone who says they like Carney, I get away from them. I don't want to hear a word they have to say. They trigger me. They drive me crazy. Well, if that's the way you're going to react to people who have an opposing point of view to your own, and you're going to shut them down and not listen to them and not engage in any dialogue whatsoever, then you're going to have this false impression that your point of view is the pervasive point of view. Mike is here, and Mike is writing that we all know the difference between right and wrong, and the leftists do everything wrong. I'm not willing to go so far as to say that just left, but when we get to the extremist left, the wackaloons who, again, don't know the difference between a boy and a girl, you know, who always, who have bought into critical race theory and identity politics, or group identity politics, where everything is about what group you belong to. Are you part of the oppressed group, or are you part of the oppressor group? And, that is the extremist element. And I agree with you in that sense. When you get to the extremes on the left, they're insane. But likewise, on the extreme right, there are individuals who view, there are racists on the extreme right, and I don't have any truck with them either. There are individuals who believe, white nationalism, that Canada should be reserved for only white people. Give me a break. That's extremist, and I don't have any truck with that either. Anyway, I've got Jim a good Greek name, Tikanis, Kalaisti. I think Pierre will not only win the confidence of his own party, he will be our next prime minister. During the last election, I did a podcast you can check back on here. I had a friend of mine on, a retired firefighter from Petawawa. I'm ex-military, by the way, although my friend Jacques Lapierre from Petawawa is not. Petawawa is the home of the Royal Canadian Regiment, major military base. We have three major military bases in Canada. One's in Edmonton. That's the PPCLI, the Princess Pat's Light Infantry. That's Edmonton. Then there's Petawawa. That's the home of the Royal Canadian Regiment. And then you have Valcartier, 5th Mechanized Brigade Group, and that's the home of the 22nd Regiment, often referred to as the Vendus, playing on 22, le 22e. And yes, I do speak French. Si on a des gens bilingues, des francophones qui veulent demander n'importe quoi dans le chat, vas-y, je suis capable. I can get by in French. I was posted to Valcartier when I was in the military. I left in 2021. I wasn't going to take that that wonderful medical intervention that they tried to force on so many people, and in many cases successfully. And this is, a big part of the reason that has pushed me as far away from the Liberal Party as you could ever want to get. because they imposed so much of that on us. Pierre Poilievre has a tough job. He has a really tough job. The Conservative Party of Canada is a big tent party, and within that big tent, you have individuals who are gung ho for gun rights, and they're gung ho for restricting immigration and a bunch of other policy initiatives. And the leader, whoever it happens to be, of the party has to navigate things very carefully because you don't want to alienate too much of the broader Canadian voting public. The trucker convoy was a very polarizing issue in this country. There were individuals like me who were gung ho. I was out on the my town has two overpasses. We probably had in the neighborhood on the two of them, in and around, probably close to 100 people on the two combined. I was waving a Canadian flag. I was waving a no more lockdown sign. I was thrilled with the truckers and what they were doing, going to Ottawa, going directly to where the problems were being originated. The mandates, Theresa Tam, this was federal government policy that was trickling down to the provinces, trickling down to the municipalities, trickling down to local hockey clubs that wouldn't let kids strap up their skates unless they took a shot that ultimately turned out to be more in the view of many. I have to tread carefully, but in the view of many, the squeeze was not worth the juice. There was more risk than benefit in the eyes of a lot of qualified experts. So one of whom, and when qualified experts came out and with the requisite educational background and experience to offer an opinion, they were hammered. Doctors lost their license. There's one, Francis Christian. Check him out. He has a Substack. Francis Christian, a teaching surgeon at the University of Saskatchewan, had his privileges at the university removed. This is a guy who was a co-editor of a medical journal. He, reached the heights of his profession. He was teaching other doctors surgical technique. And he dared to express the opinion that children, healthy, non-immunocompromised, no comorbidity children, healthy children, well, maybe they shouldn't, maybe they don't need this COVID vaccine. And they took away his license, they censured him, they destroyed his career. Qualified, offering, qualified opinion. I'm not even saying necessarily that his opinion was right, but that's how Gestapo, our liberal government, with Mark Carney as the principal economic advisor to Justin Trudeau starting in 2020, that's how they were operating. And the truckers went and they said, enough, enough. But it was very polarizing because CBC News, Global, CTV, so much of the media machine embedded it into the public consciousness that this was an illegal occupation. An illegal occupation. The illegal occupation of Ottawa continues. Residents are terrorized. They're afraid to leave their homes. Oh, they went hyperbole on steroids. And they embedded the narrative in a lot of people's minds that the trucker convoy was un-Canadian. People were getting triggered by the American flag. Oh, you're one of those trucker convoy supporters. And Pierre Poilievre had to navigate that. He doesn't want a large percent of the voting population has bought into this garbage. And Poilievre went further than any federal politician in supporting the truckers, but for many, he didn't go far enough. And the thing I want people to recognize, as the leader of a federal big tent party that is hoping to form the next government, You have to be careful about alienating large segments of the voting population. Let me read what is being said. My computer just got a pop up. Let me get rid of it. Uh, I've got Ollie. Ollie is writing, in the face of Trump, Pierre Poilievre would have instantly rolled over and showed his soft underbelly. Well, you'll have to, that's, uh, we've seen Mark Carney's elbows go way in. You think he would have done worse than what Mark Carney has done? Pulling his elbows in. We're not retaliating, and all this. I don't know what Pierre Poilievre would have done differently vis-a-vis Trump. What would he have done with respect to Trump? However, it should be noted that Trump said that he had no use for Pierre Poilievre and that he was no friend of the United States of America. He said that Trump likewise said that he would prefer to deal with a liberal prime minister. He finds them easier to negotiate with than conservatives. Trump's a bully. We know that. And just to be clear, when it comes to Donald Trump, myself personally, I compartmentalize. Some things I like, there are things that I like. He knows the difference between a man and a woman. Yay, that's a good thing. There are things that I don't like. He's a bull in a china shop. But let's go on, read the comments. And then Brandon is taking exception, saying, when did Pierre Poilievre have an underbelly? He's been very consistent. I like Poilievre. I don't think he's perfect. There is no perfect politician. There are individuals, conservatives, many of whom will say, he has to, he can't put any water in the wine at all, at all, at all. And unfortunately, you cannot lead a big tent federal party in Canada unless you're willing. You have to be realistic. Anyway, Jim, my Greek friend, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that last name, but it ends with a KOS. And in my experience, that's typically Greek. You can let me know whether I'm right or not. All I know is Tikanis, Kalasti, Efaristo, Parakalo. I used to live at Pape and Danforth area, Greek town in Toronto, although I myself know Greek heritage, of which I am aware. Anyway, I think what is very interesting is the support of young people for conservatives. True. I think Pierre has done a great job of providing hope to the younger generations for a better Canada. And excellent comment, Jim. Appreciate you chiming in very much. Younger Canadians, and I think this is what the CBCs and the media landscape, the media players, this is what they fear. They're going to do everything possible that they can to cut Poilievre's legs out from under him. And they're likewise at the same time going to make Mark Carney out to be the second coming, the most amazing politician who ever lived. So they'll provide a real contrast. Oh, we've got this amazing Mark Carney, the guy who, print more money Carney. Carney was head of the Bank of Canada, he was head of the Bank of England, and he engaged in a policy called quantitative easing. Quantitative, oh, quantity, that's good, lots. Oh, yay. Easing, oh, easing is good. But no one ever explains what quantitative easing actually means, and it means printing more money. What happens in quantitative easing is that the government of Canada, issues bonds that yield maybe 2%, 3%, whatever the yield is, whatever interest rate they put it at, and then they sell them. Who buys them? The central bank, the Bank of Canada. And where does the central bank get the money to buy the bonds that the government of Canada is creating? They print more money, create more money. When you print more money, whether it's actual physical printing or digitalized money, what you're doing, that is inflationary, and we've all seen what's happened to the cost of groceries and everything else over the past, 5 years and going back to that great financial crisis, 2007. It was in and around that neighborhood when Carney and his central bank cohorts were cranking out the money. Why did they call it quantitative easing? Because they know that the vast majority of the population is stupid. They won't bother to find out what it actually means. And the quantitative part relates to the expansion of the money supply, and the easing is the easing on restrictions that preclude governments from issuing these bonds. We're going to ease those rules and we're going to crank out more money. Quantitative easing. Anyway, I've missed a few things, so let me scroll back so I can catch up. Um, We've got Nancy is writing a week ago, the New World Order was deemed a conspiracy theory. Maybe it's enough to jolt a few people awake. Yeah, a few weeks ago, a month ago, New World Order, oh, it's a conspiracy. Now we have Mark Carney going to his bosses in Beijing and meeting with the leadership of the Communist Party of China, and then proclaiming that, further embedding Canada, further integrating Canada and Chinese economies together and saying that our new partnership that sets us up well for the new world order. And he made sure to say those words very slow, very deliberate, with a big pause between each word, because he wanted it to resonate. He wanted people to understand. And I do agree with Carney in one respect. I think most people do, right or left. The world is changing right now. The old order is going away, and a new order is being imposed on us. And whether it doesn't matter whether it's Trump in the White House, doesn't matter who is the prime minister of Canada, the ordering of the world is changing. Um, Probably even more seismically than the last major change. And I would say that the last major change, the biggest change of the past 100 years happened about 80 years ago, 75 or 80, during the conference at Yalta in the wake of World War II, when the United States, Britain, and the old Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, Winston Churchill, Franklin Delano Roosevelt got together with their associated teams, entourages, and they mapped out how they were going to establish a new world order. And many, Canadians, Americans even will say, well, it wasn't really that much of a new world order. Well, tell that to the people who were living in Poland or in Czechoslovakia or in what became known as Yugoslavia in the Balkans, or, their world changed dramatically. They went from being, autonomous nation states to under the thumb of the dictatorial communist Soviets. And Germany was cut into half. You had West Germany, East Germany. I probably should do that the other way around. It's backwards when I do it on the screen. Uh, so Germany was cut in half, East and West, and Berlin was divided into four. Berlin was divided. You had East Berlin, which was half of the city of Berlin, which was under the control of the Soviet Union. And then the other half was cut into three separate parts, one administered by the Brits, one by the French, one by the Americans. And that was a significant reordering of the world. And we are in a transitionary phase right now. And the question is, do we want Canada being led by someone who seems to be deep in the pockets of the communist Chinese, a brutal dictatorship? You want to know how they treat religious freedom? Check the manner in which Christians are treated in China, or the Uyghurs. I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce that, but it's the Muslim minority Chinese population and the oppression they are under. And this is who we are tying our can to. This is who we are embedding ourselves. This is, they are not going to respect Western values, the rule of law, democratic norms. We're at the beginning of it now. We can stop it now. And you can stop it later, but the further you get in, the further we put ourselves under that thumb, the harder it is going to be, and the more it is going to take to to extricate ourselves from communist control. Let me read on. But I love Jim's comment about the young people. I think a lot of young people, thanks to people like Charlie Kirk, thanks to countless others, are beginning to recognize that I work. I left the Army June 2021. For a year, I did nothing, almost a year, because you had to be vaccinated to work. You got to be vaccinated to work here. You got to be vaccinated to work there. I don't want to get a medical intervention, a vaccine, where Moderna and Pfizer both destroyed their placebo groups early in 2021, January, February. They started giving everyone who had had the placebo, pretty much like 98, 99% of the people in the placebo group, after just a few months, were given the mRNA. And so they have no effective way to measure adverse events in the dose group versus the placebo group, because there is no placebo group. Well, we got, 49,500 who have received the mRNA. Oh, how many are in the placebo group? 3.5, 400. Well, how can we make meaningful comparisons? Well, we can't. So anyway, that's a side issue. But a lot of, getting back to Jim's point, a lot of younger Canadians recognize the insanity of it. They look and they say, I had to take that vaccine, and now I've had health issues since, and I was forced to because I wanted to play hockey, because I wanted to go to college, because my parents told me I had to, because they watch CBC News every night and they get indoctrinated. And kids, I was saying, I work with kids. After I left the Army, I started working in a grocery store in March of 2022, because they didn't require the vaccine. And what I found is that the young people that I work with, they recognize that there are two genders overwhelmingly, and they go, and so younger people are gravitating more toward the conservative side. And we need an individual like Pierre Poilievre. He was asked by a podcaster if he would align with Trump on the whole transgender business, and Poilievre handled it as well as he could have. It was the podcaster was very much trying to get Poilievre he was trying to line him up with Donald Trump. But Pierre Poilievre left Trump aside and he said, well, I'm only aware of two genders, male and female. Are there other ones? Can you tell me? What other genders are there? And the podcaster didn't know. How do you answer? There are only two. There's male and female. Anyway, let's read on. And Pastor Dave, 67. Pastor Dave, you're not the Pastor Dave that I know from in town here, are you, Pastor Dave? Although, Pastor Dave, you've got Pastor Dave 67, and the Dave that I know, the pastor that I know, I don't want to say his last name, he's older than someone. I'm assuming 67 is maybe a birth year. I was born 66, and I appreciate Christians coming on the channel, because I too am a professing Christian. That is to say, I proclaim Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. I believe that he went to the cross, that he died, that on the third day that he was buried, and that on the third day he rose again, and that through his death I can be reconciled to a perfect, holy, and righteous God. So I do my best. I don't want to beat people over the head with my faith. I know that's annoying. Okay. I get it. If the Christian gospel, good news, if that message triggers you, makes you angry, I understand. And I have a bit of a Calvinistic outlook. It's kind of the Calvinists believe in an idea that's somewhat predeterministic. I'm going way too off topic here. Let's get it back. Anyway, thanks for commenting, Pastor Dave. And Wellen 1758 is saying, hell yeah, he will. Hell yeah, he will win. He's got WPP. I'm thinking that's win the leadership review. And to my mind, for him to maintain his control, maintain his position as party leader, 70% is the safe number. I believe if he gets 70% or more, the higher the better, that Bob's your uncle. He'll be leading the Conservative Party into the next election. Where things get murky is if he's in and around 66 or less percent, then he could still, let's say he gets 66%, which means 2/3 support, 1/3 does not. Can you lead an election where an entire third of the delegates in your party do not think you should be leading the party? During an election campaign, you need a party to be unified. You need everyone pulling in the same direction. Anyway, going on. I've got a proud northerner who's writing Trudeau, Biden, Biden. PP is useless. As for the truckers, try breathing diesel fumes for days while your child screams and cries all night. Where do you live, proud northerner? I bet you don't even live in downtown Ottawa near Wellington Street where the trucker convoy took place. That would be my guess. I have extended family members, cousins who live in Ottawa. One in particular lives within about a 15-20 minute walk of Parliament Hill, and she was complaining about the honk honk, which I get. I can certainly see why people would find those air horns annoying. However, do you hear people complaining as vociferously when you have, I don't know, say, Queers for Palestine blocking traffic? Well, that's okay. That's Queers for Palestine. I mean, most of the people who were upset at the trucker convoy were the individuals who were wearing double masks outside and couldn't wait to get booster number 5. So anyway, and then I have Cliff making a prediction. He says that in the leadership review that Poilievre will get north of 80% of the vote. And if he gets that, that is fantastic. That shows, a strong level of support. That will show that the Conservative Party overwhelmingly is lined up behind him and that they want him leading them into the next election. The difficulty gets down. I hope your prediction is right. The higher, the better. Anyway, Pastor Dave is saying that Pierre is not perfect, as I've mentioned, but none of us all, from a Christian perspective, we're all broken, we're all fallen, we're all sinful. There's only ever been one perfect human being. When God took on human flesh and incarnated into this world. But he's saying, and conservatives can't keep on dumping their leaders after every election loss. Hold fast and build. Amen. There is an aspect to this. I was talking about the Canadian political landscape and the history and how the modern Conservative Party of Canada came into being in 2003. Well, the first leader they elected once they merged was Stephen Harper. And Stephen Harper, in his first election, he lost. Paul Martin formed a minority government. Stephen Harper was leading the opposition Conservatives. And the Conservative Party at that point, they could have dumped Stephen Harper. Stephen Harper said, I will lead this party into the next election, but he faced a mandatory leadership review, just like Pierre Poilievre is facing, and Conservative Party delegates, members endorsed Harper staying on as leader. And what happened? He led them into the next election. think it was in and around 2006, and the Conservative Party formed the government. And so uh, there's the recipe, as Pastor Dave is saying. If they want to keep dumping their leaders like they've been doing, first Stephen Harper lost in 2015 to Justin Trudeau's Liberals, and Stephen Harper, having been Prime Minister of Canada for 10 years, resigned leadership of the party, and they had a leadership convention, leadership race, and the party leadership was won by Andrew Scheer. And then in the 2019 election, Andrew Scheer led the Conservative Party. They lost. The Liberals were knocked down from a majority to a minority, and the Conservative Party won the popular vote, but still Andrew Scheer opted to resign the leadership rather than face a leadership review, which he could have done. He said, no, I'm going to tap out. You can pick a new leader. And in that subsequent leadership convention, leadership race, Aaron O'Toole won. And Aaron O'Toole then ran in the 2021 election. And he lost, although the Conservatives, again, they won the popular vote. But Aaron O'Toole from Durham riding, not far from where I live, I'm going to resign. And it triggered another leadership race. And then they chose Pierre Poilievre. And Pierre Poilievre, then in the election that he ran, the just completed April 2025 election, he achieved a popular vote count percentage-wise that was higher than anything Harper had achieved. The biggest share of the popular vote that any Conservative Party, the modern Conservative Party of Canada, has ever achieved was achieved by Pierre Poilievre. And I think that deserves second go. What happened to the political landscape is that the NDP and even the Green Party, everything else cratered. It became binary. Became basically, for a large measure, either liberal or conservative. Yeah, the NDP, I think they won 6 or 7 seats. The Greens won 1, but their vote collapsed. Everyone on the progressive side gravitated toward the Liberals, and they managed to win by 2 or 3 percentage points in the popular vote, and they came within a whisker of forming a majority government. Anyway, let me read on. Proud Northerner is writing, how has PP I lose the track, sorry. How has Pierre Poilievre provided hope to young Canadians? What has he done? He's told them that if you're a boy, this is the message, his implied message by saying there are only 2 genders, is he's saying to boys, you can't go compete. You can't go into the women's locker room. You can't compete against girls. And children recognize, and when I use the term children, I'm referring to those 17 and under. They recognize, well, the guy's right on. They recognize that when you expand the money supply, as Mark Carney did when he was central bank governor, that it's going to be inflationary and you're going to destroy the ability of young people to enter the real estate market and so many other things. Young people are recognizing that, damn, I'm never going to have the standard of living that my parents had. I'm going to have to live in the basement until I'm 48 to save up. And then, and it's going to cost me $1 million to buy a bus shelter in Vancouver. And they recognize the failure of liberal policies. They recognize the failure of leaving our monumental resource wealth stuck in the ground by making it nigh on impossible for any infrastructure projects to go forward, like pipelines to get things like LNG and our wonderful crude to Tidewater, to BC, or up, into James Bay or the Hudson's Bay. Anyway, that's how he has provided hope. And Alexander Campbell answers the question as well by saying he focuses on issues they care about. The Liberal supporters, typically what they're interested in is, are you going to increase government programs? Are you going to spend more money? I don't care where the money comes from, just so long as you spend it on me. And younger Canadians facing the bleak future that they have, that has been imposed on them by 10 plus years of liberal rule, are recognizing that, we're heading in the wrong direction. Yeah, we're progressing right over a cliff, and my future is going to be dark. Anyway, if we keep going in the same direction, Joe Leblanc is saying if Pierre Poilievre goes, so does my support for the Conservative Party. Just speaking personally, in the 2019 and 2021 federal elections, I supported the People's Party of Canada, Maxime Bernier. So, but I was happy to move back to the Conservative Party of Canada. I was happy to have a leader like Pierre Poilievre, who has a little of what I'll call the royal jelly. He's willing to lead. He's willing not just to pander to public opinion. He's willing to stake out his ground and defend it. That's what leadership is. Politics, sadly, has denigrated to the point where everything is done by party insiders, and they're constantly polling the population, and then based on the polling, then they craft their policy positions. Well, what do Canadians want? It's like a teacher saying, "How do you want me to mark you? Do you want to become, do you want to increase the scope of your intellect, or you just want a high mark?" We just want a high mark. Anyway, going on. Brandon is writing, were you aware Carney finished selling all Canada's reserve gold? We have no gold. I was not aware of that, but I know that the gold standard is long in the past. Canada, like the United States, like so many countries around the world, we have what is referred to as a fiat currency. It's based on, there's nothing of tangible value is supporting the Canadian dollar. It's all our dollar is worth what it's worth based on the perception within the broader monetary markets. And that's what it boils down to. At any rate, about 180 billion that we missed out on if we kept it all. I wonder what we bought. I know that there was a time I thought Trudeau had gotten rid of what little remained of Canadian precious metal reserves, but I don't know enough about that to talk to it. I've got Xander Kwan writing, what do you think about Carney's speech at Davos? The most telling part for me is, Carney has an inflated opinion of himself, and he sees himself as the leader of a middle power. I love this. Canada's a middle power, and we're not. We're nowhere near to a middle power. In point of fact, there are no middle powers. The GDP of the United States is somewhere in and around $30 billion. The next ranking number 2 would be the European Union. And I think there are in and around, I think it's 28 countries are in the European Union, in and around that number. And if you combine all of them together, and that's fair, it's fair to take the European Union, take Italy, France, Austria, Germany, and, it's fair to put them, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, it's fair to lump them all together because it is a political union. There is the European Parliament, there is the Hague. So, okay. And they come in around 20 billion, somewhere around 20 billion. Sorry, I'm using the term billion. I mean to use the word trillion. I apologize. So the US is 30 trillion, not billion. 30 trillion, that's annual GDP. European Union, all 28 or so countries combined, in around 20 trillion. I checked this. And the China is number 3. And they're in and around 19 and a bit. They're not far behind Europe. And remember, they are ascending. Their economy has annual growth rates that 2%. If their economy grows 2%, that's horrible results. In Canada, if our economy grew 2% in a year, there'd be a parade. That would be amazing. China, that's no big deal. They've been experiencing 4, 5, even up as high as 7 and 8% annual growth in their economy. And that's because a lot of China is not industrialized yet. They're having to fire up coal-fired. They're having to build new coal-generated electrical plants constantly to fuel their burgeoning economy. Whereas in Canada, we've got senior citizens wondering how they can afford a loaf of bread. Anyway, I found that laughable that Carney referred to us as a middle power. When it comes to Canada, we're at somewhere in around 2 or 3 trillion. We're nowhere near, middle power. That's like calling a 12-year-old boxer who weighs 68 pounds a middleweight, in the WBA, in the World Boxing Association. We're pipsqueak. And, most of the like Germany, but they're part of their GDP is next up after China, around 5 billion. So you go from 19 to Germany, that's 5 trillion. I keep saying billion, I mean to say trillion. And the thing is, when it comes to Germany, they're part of the European Union. So, you can't count them twice. So that would knock if you took Germany out of the European Union, then China becomes the number 2 economy in the world. And if you eliminate the European Union, and again, China is on the rise. Communist dictatorship, forget constitutional rights, forget liberty, forget freedom, forget freedom of speech, forget so many of the rights and enshrined rights that Canadians, I think, often take for granted without realizing how tenuous they are. I am a Canadian. I'm Canadian. Both my parents were Canadian born. 3 of my 4 grandparents were Canadian born. But I don't say that. I mean, if someone is a first generation Canadian, you're still a Canadian. Have you sworn allegiance to, Canada, to the nation state of Canada, to our laws, to our constitution, then you're a Canadian. But I did spend 10 years growing up in the United States as a child. I was an expatriate Canadian living in New Jersey, New York, Oregon. And so I have a fair degree of knowledge of the United States, I think more than the average Canadian. And after the founding fathers, what they call the founding fathers in the United States, had written the U.S. Constitution, someone asked, have you given us a republic or a dominion or a kingdom? And, what form of government are we going to have? And I believe it's attributed to Benjamin Franklin. This may or may not be true. I don't know if he actually said it, but I like it regardless. And he said, we gave you a republic. Now the question is, can you keep it? Can Canada maintain itself as a country with a constitution, a democratic system of government that respects the rule of law, that respects human rights? That was tested severely during the COVID era, when respecting human rights and respecting things like bodily autonomy does not allow the government to say, if you don't take this rushed, we started working on it less than a year ago, and now here it is, put it in your body, or you can't work, or you can't go visit your dying mother. You can't go get on that plane to visit your dying mother because you won't take this. These are things that Carney and Trudeau and the Liberal Party pushed. Anyway, going on. Wellwan, or Wellen, however it's said, is writing, he got more people voting for the Conservatives the last election than the last 30 years. Yes, that's right. The most votes the Conservative Party of Canada has ever gotten since it's the modern Conservative Party of Canada, created in 2003 as a merger between the old Progressive Conservative and the old Canadian Alliance. Proud Northerner. He believes that Carney's speech was very inspiring and very well structured and executed. I do think Carney blows Justin Trudeau out of the water. Mr. Carney errs and also is Pierre Poilievre. So does everyone. I do it. But with Trudeau, it was over the top. Carney is he's very effective. The manner in which he delivered the speech, it was well written, no problem acknowledging that. But when you look at the substance of it, calling Canada middle power, give me, that when that happens, when someone starts off or early on says something that is blatantly false and ridiculous, they lose me. I think a lot of people just go, "Oh, yay, we're a middle power. We're middle of the pack." Give me a break. There's a mountain between us and China, the European Union, and the United States in terms of economic power. We're no and our military, of which I'm a veteran. Give me a break. I saw a comedian talking about the fact that about apparently the Danish army can't even afford to buy blanks. I don't know whether it's true or not, but it made for great comedy. So which army is so poorly funded that they cannot afford blanks? They just point the empty weapons and go bang, bang. You probably know the comedian I'm referring to. Many will have seen him. He's a British guy. I don't know his name. And Proud Northerner goes on to say that Pierre Poilievre, I love how, it's this jingoism that double-digit IQ types we hear. Now, on the conservative side, it's done as well. They go libtard, bunch of libtards. So I don't engage in that. But, this PP stuff, PP, as a, to my mind, it's brain dead. His name is Pierre Poilievre. It's not, it always bothered me. I don't have any truck with the NDP and with former leader Jagmeet Singh, but I would pronounce his name Jagmeet, not Jagmeet. His name is written Jagmeet, but even on his own Twitter profile, it said Jagmeet, pronounced Jugmeet. Jug rhymes with hug. And okay, if that's the way your name is pronounced, that's the way I'm going to pronounce it. I realize that names aren't always pronounced the way they appear on paper. And it's just a matter of respect. Even though I disagree with Jagmeet's politics and what have you, I will at least show common decency and human respect and pronounce his name in the proper manner in the way he wants it pronounced. If he says it's Jagmeet, he's who better to ask than the guy whose name it is. Anyway, so this whole TP thing really annoys me. Right, Pierre? Right, Poilievre? Poilievre. If you have trouble with Poilievre, it's a French name, although Poilievre is an Anglo first. He speaks French very well, but he does not have what I would call native fluency. And anyway, so Proud Northerner thinks Pierre would have just babbled about how broken Canada is because of JT. I think what Pierre Poilievre would do is, number one, he'd pull us out of a lot of the globalist institutions that we're a part of. I think he would make big cuts to foreign aid. I think that he would remove a lot of the regulatory roadblocks that prevent things like pipelines from being built. And he would not be perfect. He would just be a damn sight better. The biggest issue, politically, is that perfection is the enemy of the good. the liberals and their media. Oh yeah, he would cut off funding to the CBC, and he'd stop subsidizing the legacy media to the tune of $300 to $400 million a year. We have bigger priorities than subsidizing a propagandistic news industry, media industry. Anyway, uh, I'm just going to read up and then I'm going to wrap up because we're at 1:15. So if you've enjoyed the content, thank you. I've had 10 likes already. It's tough to the YouTube landscape is competitive, it's hard, and I am trying to grow the channel as much as I can. I've got like 1,300 odd subscribers. The more the better, because I think when people chance upon when they encounter a station for the first time, I think they're more inclined to look if they see more subscribers. So if you want to help me out, that's one way. The likes also help. Comments in the comment field down below also help. So that would be good. Um, and like, share, subscribe. Anyway, um, I'll read up and then I'm going to call it a night. I have Lee Crumble is writing that Pierre Poilievre is the only guy with a plan to fix Canada. Going woke green isn't going to make Canada rich. Yeah. And that's an area where I think Pierre Poilievre, he's doing this dance. He doesn't want to alienate too much of the voting populace. There are an awful lot of Canadian voters who have been brainwashed into believing that carbon is the big bad boogeyman and we have to get to net zero and all this, and who fail to recognize that even if carbon is what they claim it is, that it's this big bad boogeyman, remember, we're a pipsqueak. Our emissions are nothing compared to China. And China keeps throwing more and more coal-fired electrical power generation onto their grid. Like probably every month they have more coal being burned to fuel their growing economy. Meanwhile, in Canada, what are we doing? And cheap energy fuels an economy. What are we doing here in Canada? Rather than trying to provide cheap energy, we're trying to make energy more expensive, which puts the brakes on economic growth, on industry. We're yeah, it's very counterproductive. You can't suck and blow at the same time. Do you want to help Canadian industry? Do you want to improve the economy? Then we need cheap energy. Well, we're going to improve the economy, but we're going to make energy more expensive. Well, those two things do not go together. And climate always changes. If I do a video on climate that gets a flag, there will be a little fact check notification underneath the video saying that human activity is the principal driver of climate change. And I say garbage, because in and around the year 1000, there was a period called the medieval warming period, lasted from about 1100 to about 1400, and the planet got warm. Greenland, the ice sheets on Greenland pulled back so significantly that Eric the Red, or whatever that Norse guy's name was, went by in his longboat and said, Greenland, Greenland, a green land. And permanent settlements were established on Greenland at that time because it was a green land, because the planet was warming. There was climate change going on, global warming. Well, if human activity is the principal driver of global warming, climate change, well, then what were humans doing? Were the Vikings using too many plastic bags? Were they, burning too much oil and gas? Couldn't have been. They didn't have any. What was driving climate change back then? And then 1400 till about 1800, we went into a new period called the Little Ice Age. Climate changed again. There seems to be an historical pattern of in and around 400 or so years, there are periods of 400 years of warming, 400 years of cooling, 400 years of warming. And it looks like we're right in the middle of a warming phase, like the medieval warming period. And that means we have another 200 years to go. I do not believe in climate change. that I do not believe that human activity is the principal driver of climate change. Climate changes whether humans do anything or not. Anyway, that's another video. Proud Northerner is asking me if I am insane. Don't believe so. No, we're not deep in the pockets yet. He's moving us deeper. We're tying our cam. We're embedding ourselves more closely with China. And if would China want to establish military bases in our Arctic? They call themselves a near Arctic power, and yet they don't. None of their territory touches the Arctic Circle, but they refer to themselves as a near Arctic power. They want to have influence in the Arctic region. Could they conceivably go to Mark Carney or whomever is the Prime Minister of Canada and saying, given our tight economic relationship, given the fact that you're buying so many of our electrical vehicles and so much of our other products, and because we're so integrated financially, economically now, we want to build a military base, an installation, a radar station up in the Yukon, up in Iqaluit, up in or Nunavut or Northwest Territories. I certainly see that as highly not only possible, but probable. We're into the game of realpolitik now, geopolitics. Anyway, so you seem to be of the opinion that, oh no, China's our friends. We're just going to trade with them. We're not going to change our way of life. That we got to get out of this American hegemony that has pretty much been the status quo ever since World War II. Well, that's bad. That's bad. Because that's we get into this whole identity politics, group politics, and the Americans are bad. Chinese are good. When they quash democratic protest, when they trample on religious freedoms, that's okay. They won't try and impose that on us. I think you're being more than a little bit naive. Anyway, proud Northern, and then I'll end off with Brandon. We are in a Ponzi scheme. That's new money pays the old. If we don't build up some real assets like gold and resource industry, we should be self-sufficient if needed. We spend more than we collect and pay WT tomorrow. I get the gist of what you're saying. I know typing is a bit of a pain in the rear end. You can't always convey your thoughts as clearly as you'd like text, but I think I get the gist of it. At any rate, I've gone on for almost an hour and 22 minutes. So I'm going to wrap up. Thank you for tuning in. I'll make a prediction. I think that Pierre Poilievre is going to come in somewhere in and around the 75% area. I'll say 75. Somewhere in and around 75%. That will be, I'm not sure when the vote will be announced. They start voting Friday, 7:30. That's Friday, the 30th of January. That's when they start voting. I don't know when the voting stops. I don't know when the results will be announced. I can't find that information. I don't know if anyone here knows it. Again, I'm not a card-carrying member of the Conservative Party of Canada or any political party. I have been politically active in the past. You may be surprised to know that in my younger days, I was a card-carrying member of the federal Liberal Party, card-carrying member of the provincial NDP. I've also been a member of the Conservative Party. So that is to say, my views, attitudes, opinions are subject to change. I'm not an ideologue. And it's when you get to the extreme right and the extreme left, that's the domain of the ideologues, my way or the highway, authoritarian, and they're mirror images of each other. They both, will truck no dissent whatsoever, no water allowed in the wine. Anyway, I'm rambling. Thank you for watching again. Appreciate likes, shares, subscribes, and whether or not you're a Christian, I like to end my live broadcasts, my live streams with a blessing, because I know we live in challenging times. This is a, rough, what's going to happen with Greenland? What's going to happen with Russia, Ukraine? What's going to happen in the Middle East? Is Iran, going to settle down? Are they going to overthrow the Islamic Republic or not? There's so many question marks, and there's the economic turmoil in our own, Canada, the trade war, the fracturing relations between us and our largest trading partner, the Americans, our friends. And things can be unsettling. And so I like to end my live streams with a blessing from the book of Numbers. It's not word for word what's in there. It's kind of a redacted version, but I like these words and I hope you appreciate them as well. And the words are these: May the Lord God, creator of all things, may he bless and keep you. May God make his face to shine upon you, and may he grant you peace. And I'm here to tell you, if you find the world unsettling, if you're looking for truth in a sea of lies, and if you feel yourself being pulled, if you find yourself inclined to think about checking out this Christian faith, I would encourage you not to do it online, but to seek out a church that reads from God's holy book. And I normally have a Bible. Here we go. I normally have a Bible near me. This is the Canadian Forces edition. It's the Good News translation. But I encourage you to find a church that reads from this book. And I promise you, whatever church you find, they will not be perfect. They will not get everything right. Like politics, religion is populated by the same broken, fallen, sinful people. But there's blessings that come from the reading of this word. And I encourage you to do that. You're not going to find salvation. You're not going to find peace, joy, and contentment on a YouTube channel. Not mine and not anyone else's. Can be a good little supplement, but that's it, just a supplement. You want the meat. At any rate, thank you everyone who showed up, and hope to see you all back. I'm going to be doing a faith-based podcast on Sunday for anyone interested. If that's your thing, if you like talking faith. And it's my hope that in talking about faith, that maybe plant a little seed that will encourage someone to go out in their community and seek out a Bible believing, Bible reading church. And, which Bible do you read? The one you're reading, that's the good one. Whether it's Good News Bible, NIV, King James, whatever. I'm rambling. God bless. Thank you for watching. And I won't touch this topic again until after the results are known. Once the results are not known, I will likely do a stream. Anyway, talk to you later. Thanks again. Good night now.